We're joined now by Kurt Volker, who served as the US ambassador to NATO. Thank you so much for being with us today. Well, as you know, the UK and US have launched strikes on the Houthis, a militia group who've been backed by Iran, targeting ships in the Red Sea. In your view, was that the right thing to do?
Absolutely. I don't see any question that the reason that those attacks by the Houthis on international shipping took place was because they believed that there would be no response. They had already sent so many missiles against US forces in the region. Iran has launched attacks through Hamas, through Hezbollah, through the Houthis, and there was almost no response. And so they believed they could do this with impunity. In order to get this back in the box, it was essential to actually hit back at the Houthis and to show that we are willing to do it again. We have to reestablish a sense of deterrence against this kind of behavior.
I mean, how concerned are you about the risk of potential escalation? I mean, is that something we should be worried about, going into a direct conflict with Iran?
Quite the opposite. I think that the risks are on the side of inaction. If you don't take action, then you see things like what the Houthis were doing begin to occur. It's important to establish that there is a deterrent to that kind of behavior. And so doing this will help reestablish that. There is a temporary risk of more exchange of military force from both sides. And there is even the possibility that there may be a need to engage Iran directly to drive the message home. But hopefully this avoids the kind of massive escalation that could otherwise occur just through inaction.
It's interesting, you're talking there about the risk of inaction. And it feels to me like we could be at a bit of a crossroads when it comes to America policy. We've seen the election campaign, getting going today with the Iowa caucuses. The former president, Donald Trump, has been someone who's often talked about, isolationism. Like, is it right to be committing troops abroad? Is that a concern for you?
It's not, and particularly when we're talking about Iran and the Middle East, President Trump was very aggressive towards Iran. He had a policy that was called maximum pressure. It was sanctions, it was military pressure, and I'm sure that he would be pushing for the same thing now. So I think President Biden doesn't really have to worry about pushback coming from the right. He will have pushback from the left. There are always those on the Democratic side who want to see some kind of negotiation with Iran, who prioritize a nuclear agreement with Iran over these regional issues. But as we've seen, at least as I believe we've seen, Iran takes advantage of that desire to negotiate to then press with its own proxies a military conflict.
Now, as the former US Special Envoy to Ukraine, I'm interested in your views on Russia's role here, because, of course, Iran has been arming Russia. In your view, is this all connected? Former president talked about an axis of evil. Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, there's certainly an axis. We have Russia and Iran working together very closely. Most of the drones that Russia fires at Ukraine almost every night come from Iran, recently manufactured as well. So Russia has really developed a dependency on Iran's military equipment. At the same time, Iran wanted to press this advantage in the Middle East that it feels it has with an apparently weaker US, weaker West, and a vulnerable Netanyahu, and got Russia's acquiescence to do so. And Russia has then offered some help in exchange to Iran, things that we would not have seen even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. So I do think there's a connection here. And remember, if you're in Israel or if you are in Ukraine, the drones that you are seeing in the skies attacking you are the very same drones from the very same source.
I'm really interesting to hear your sort of take on that. And I'm wondering as well if you could give me a take on a different question. And don't feel like you have to be polite in answering this, by the way. Here in the UK, we like to see ourselves as, international players when it comes to defence. Are we?
Definitely the UK is. There's different ways to look at it. The UK went through a period of reduction of its military capabilities and also, frankly, diplomatic capabilities over a period of many, many years. That has begun to be reversed, but it is a long-term effort to reverse that, to reinvest in military capabilities, reinvest in diplomatic capabilities. One of the interesting things is that the UK has shown more independence of action after leaving the European Union. The EU is still stuck in long negotiations over just about everything, whereas the UK can do things like send storm shadows and NLAWs to Ukraine on time, as opposed to much delayed, as we've seen from the European Union countries and Germany.
That's interesting that actually leaving the EU, in your view, does give a bit more flexibility, I guess, to the United Kingdom in that regard. How would you rate the
Provided the
UK's...
investment is made in the capabilities, yes.
Yeah, well, that's what, how would you rate the current capability then?
It needs further investment. As I said, it's a long-term effort to turn it around. I think that effort is underway, but a lot more has to be done.
Okay. Now, you work with Donald Trump. You're his special envoy to Ukraine. If he's elected president, do you think he would make the world a safer place?
I think it's completely unpredictable. And I think that is what he prides himself on, in fact, is that he's someone who judges the situation at the time, makes his own decision, doesn't want to be surrounded by a bunch of advisors who tell him what to do. It's very unpredictable. There are some people who say he's going to threaten to leave NATO. John Bolton recently made a comment to that effect in an article. And yet at the same time, by the time it was at the end of his first presidential term, if he gets a second one, but at the end of his presidential administration, he was very supportive of NATO because he took credit for getting NATO countries to invest $70 billion more in defense. So it is just very unpredictable what he would do. I do think that it's a time when we need American leadership. It's a time when we need support against our adversaries and working together with our allies and our partners. And whoever is elected president, and we simply don't know who that will be at this point, I hope that is the direction we go in.